Hi, I'm Karen Hurt, and I'm here with our next edition of Asking for a Friend Live. And I am absolutely delighted today to have Michael Bungay-Stanier on about his brand new book, How to Work with Almost Anyone. And we're going to be talking today about building better relationships at work.
Hey, Karen, nice to be here. That's a great little intro video, and those are some really good faces and names there. You got Seth, you got Whitney, you got Liz Wiseman. There's a lot of intimidating people I'm trying to follow along here. So I'm asking for a friend. How do I not screw this up? Because I've got big shoes to fill.
Well, Michael, I have got to tell you, there's actually really only one reason I had you on this show. And do you know what that is?
To lower the general average so other people look better?
No, so you'll tell me the thing that I really most need to hear today. So I'll just give you a little context. I have a book due to the publisher. Dave and I have a book due to the publisher in 5 days.
Excellent.
And we've got a TEDx in 10 days. So I'm like the stress that I'm under. So what do I need to most hear right now?
What do you need to hear most? You already know what you need to hear. What do you need to hear?
I'm awesome and I'm doing great.
There we go. Exactly. You're awesome and you're doing great. And I would add, there's something about holding it lightly. There is something about holding it lightly. I mean, all of these things are true. All these deadlines are coming, but you'll get there. You'll do the very best job you can in the moment with the preparation you've done, and it will be perfectly good. So you're awesome and you're doing great.
Well,
I believe that deeply.
So for all of our listeners, you're awesome and you're doing great. That's one of Michael's signature lines, and love it. Sometimes that's just what you need to hear. So
I added it. I was facilitating a session, and just spontaneously I asked the people to look at the partners they were working with and say that. Massively awkward the first time it was done, but by the end of the session, when they'd done it 3 or 4 times, they were really into it. And so I added it as a line on my email, and weekly I get some notes saying, thank you. I'm glad to hear that. I needed to hear that. Thanks for the encouragement. So I'm glad to say to you too, Karen.
Okay, thanks. All right. So I really, really enjoyed your book, and it's very related to, we're deep in a book on workplace conflict and powerful phrases. So it's definitely rhymes with what is on our mind right now. And so I want to begin by talking about the best possible relationship, because that's a really important concept, I think, when you're dealing with this. So what do you mean by best possible relationship?
Yeah. So the starting point is to say, look, I think probably every working relationship, or at least almost every working relationship, can be better. But what do I actually mean by that? And so the best possible relationship says, when you think about your key working relationships, whether that's with your team, or your boss, or with collaborators, or with peers, or with customers, or with vendors, you've got a lot of people in your ecosystem that make you happy and make you successful, or at least have the ability to do so. What's the best possible relationship with each one of those people? Not every one of them is going to be fantastic and, unicorns and rainbows and little sprinkles of, whatever, glasses of champagne. It's kind of like a bell curve. You're going to have some relationships at one end, which are fabulous, and some relationships on the other ends, which are deeply unfabulous, and some stuff in the middle, which is like good enough. But how do you make each key relationship the best possible expression of that relationship? And I think to do that, you need to understand the 3 pillars of a BPR, best possible relationship. It needs to be safe, it needs to be vital, and it needs to be repairable.
Safe, vital, and repairable. Safe, spent a lot of time thinking about that. Psychological safety, I think. Vital, that one's harder to define. So what do you mean by vital?
You're quite right to say that of those 3, the one that people will know most commonly, most familiarly, is safe, because Amy Edmondson has kind of introduced this whole idea of psychological safety years ago, and teams like Google with Project Oxygen and Project Aristotle have come in and gone, actually, we've got evidence to say good teams and good managers think about psychological safety. But I don't just want a working relationship that's psychological safe. I want it to be more than that. So vital, I mean, the word vital has these 2 meanings. One is it's essential, but the other one means it's full of life. That's the one I'm really going for. And one way of thinking of this to balance safety, or to dance with safety, is psychological bravery. So how do you build a relationship that invites you onto the edges, challenges, provokes, is difficult at times, makes you think about who you are, makes you step up to the edge of your confidence and your competence, your self-awareness and your self kind of ability to kind of manage the world. It's all of that. And you can see that safe and vital kind of are in tension with each other. They dance with each other. And what a relationship that is safe and vital, one that, say, Karen, you and I built together, might be very different from a working relationship that, say, Seth Godin and I would build together. It'd have a different way of thinking about and talking about what is safe for us and what is vital for us. We're looking for that balance, the best expression of that balance between me and that other person.
And you can't get vital if you don't have safe.
Well, that's true. I mean, you can. It just isn't going to be a very successful relationship for very long, because you can
Right.
have safe without vital, and it's very, you can be yourself, but it's not going to challenge you and not going to have you grow. It's a bit of a plateau. You can have vital without safe, which is like brilliant in the moment, but as soon as something goes wrong, it goes really wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why repairable is the third element of that. You need a working relationship that is repairable as well.
Yeah. And I want to hang out in repairable in a minute, but I want to get to some of the foundational stuff first, because I thought the repairable part was, for me, one of the most powerful pieces of your work. And something I'm not sure that people are talking about it exactly the same way that you are. So there's new and it's practical. So love it. All right. So you talk about 5 key questions and 5 genres of questions, I guess, buckets of questions. So I want to talk through each one of those. And as we're doing this, if you are listening and you're tuning in and you have a question and ask, or you have a friend's question, please just type it into the chat and we'd be happy. We'll go there. We'll go there. Okay. So amplify. Let's talk about amplify.
Let's take one step backwards before we jump into this. And I'm like, why are we having these 5 questions? What's this conversation about? And this is a thing that in the book I call a Keystone Conversation. And a Keystone Conversation, and honestly, if you're watching this, this might be the one big idea to take away from this whole thing, which is to build a best possible relationship. You want to have a conversation about how you work together before you plunge into the what you're working on together. And we are always drawn into the what we're working on because it's loud and it's shiny and it's urgent and it's important and it's kind of right there and you know how to do it and that's how you feel that you add value. So the what is always quite tempting. But I'm saying take a pause and take a beat, step back and go, hey, how should you and I work together so we bring out our best and we avoid our worst? And these 5 questions help with that. And the first question, just as Karen asked, is the amplify question. And the amplify question is such a positive, good place to start because it is, what's your best? In other words, when do you shine and when do you flow? I didn't want to ask, what are you good at? Because that's a bit limiting. And I didn't want to ask, what are your strengths? Because that's a bit vague and a bit abstract. And I never know what to do with those answers. I want to hear from other people. When do they shine and when do they flow? And I want to hear about the work that does that to them. I want to hear about the way they work with other people that does that to them. And I want to hear about the essential qualities within them that brings out that best when they shine and when they flow.
You know what's so interesting about this? So 2 weeks ago, I had David Burkus on. I'm not sure if you know David.
Oh, I know him well. His new book on teams, right?
He has a new book on teams. And in his new book on teams, he talks about a very similar concept, which we unpacked. He said, versus, like DISC and all these personality assessments, great. What I really want is a conversation about how we're going to work together. And what do I need? And I was reading yours, and it's like, oh, they're on the same page with this.
Yeah, I'm actually seeing David this weekend. We're going to hang out a little bit together. So we will violently agree with each other about how right we are.
Nice. Okay, so it's starting with amplify. And I really also, this is really almost a footnote, but where you talk about just because you're good at something, and how that can become a trap. So that was so juicy. I just want to take a little side tour.
Yeah, it's helpful, isn't it? That's why the question, what are you good at, is sometimes not a very helpful question. It's got its place that there's some good stuff that's going to come from that. But there's something called the curse of competence, which is this, and you know this. As soon as I say this, you'll hear it. You can be good at something and you could really, really never want to do it ever again. It could be just, I've been doing it for 30 years and I'm just bored, sick to death of it. One is like, it's just not where I get the juice anymore. I've moved on from that. The others are like, I've got my focus in other places. But whilst you know it to be true for you, there's things that you're good at that you just don't want to do. What we do with other people is we project that if they're good at it, you should give it to them to do. So what a helpful conversation to say to somebody, let me tell you the things that I am both good at and fulfilled by. That's helpful. I'm like, I'm good at this and man, I love to do it. But then there's two other things to convey. One is, let me tell you what I am good at and I am not fulfilled by. In other words, I can be the backup, I can be the coach, I can be the mentor, but please don't delegate this sort of stuff to me. It is not the stuff I want to do. And then there's a third place, which I think is really interesting, which is, let me tell you what I am fulfilled by, but not yet good at, because that is your learning edge. That's where you're in that state of consciously incompetent, the uncomfortable, rich place where you learn and grow. So, Karen, if I was working with you, I'd say, look, Karen, this is what I am. I think I love this, but I'm not very good at it yet. I need your coaching. I need guardrails. I need a safety net. I need support so that I can really move towards mastery, in that classic Dan Pink state around what drives us. Mastery is one of his 3 drivers. I want to move towards mastery. I need your support as my colleague, my boss, my teammate to help me get there in a way that allows me to flourish, but doesn't kind of drag us down because I'm not very good at it yet.
Yeah. So, gosh, so great. So much. That's just so, if people were just having that conversation, that already elevates your relationship.
Yeah. And that's an important thing to say. So in this Keystone conversation, I'm like, it's a conversation about how you work together, not what you're working on. And then I lay out these 5 questions, and each of the questions has 3 exercises so you can kind of deepen your own self-knowledge and your own ability to articulate your answers. But you don't have to use the 5 questions and you don't have to follow them in order. They're there to kind of provoke you. I think it's really helpful if you use all 5 questions. But even if you just sit down and more generally go, hey, Karen, you and I are working together. How are we going to do this? I mean, what's the best way for us to work together? What's the worst way for us to work together? If it's that alone, that can be really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've really been talking about 2, I think here, amplify and steady, right?
Well, I think steady is the second question, and it's a little more kind of mechanical.
Okay.
And steady is, what are your practices and processes and preferences? How do you work? What is common sense for you? And the inspiration, if you like, and / frustration comes from those README documents that are a bit of a trend in some parts of the world, which is like, I'm going to write out all the things you need to know about me, and then I'm going to email them to you. And after that, you should just be able to work with me because you understand me. And I'm like, you know what? There's often really good information on that. Morning person, don't like Slack. This is how I prefer my feedback. Here are my pronouns. Don't call me Mike, just call me Michael. Hate it when people call me Mike. All sorts of little things that can become real irritants if we don't know what the other person's preferences are. So this is more about, give me the mechanics and just the logistics of what it means to work well with you.
Okay.
So we don't accidentally kind of step on each other's toes with that.
Yeah. So good. So speaking of Mike and Michael, David Dye does not like to be called Dave, except he lets my Uncle Carl call him. I think once you're over 80, you can get away with it. But
yeah, well, that's true. Like for me, my close family, my brothers and their wives and children and stuff, they all call me Mike. That's totally fine. But the people who unilaterally prefer to shorten my name to Mike, even though I've said my name's Michael, I'm like, what are you doing?
Yeah. So
it's a different name.
David Dye.
This is Mike. Let me introduce you to Mike. Here he is. I'm Michael.
All right. So speaking of, let's take a detour to this asking for a friend question.
Yeah.
Some people are uncomfortable engaging in these conversations. When you ask and sense that discomfort, how do you recommend proceeding?
David, I'd be interested for you to find the people who are comfortable in having these conversations, because they are rare. Most people are uncomfortable, or this is going to feel a little awkward for people, because for a couple of reasons. One is it's not that common a conversation. This doesn't happen that often. Secondly, it is a moment of vulnerability, an invitation to say, let me tell you about me. Let me be curious about you. Work is a much easier thing to talk about because it's that thing over there. It's not really between you and me. This is about the intimacy of a relationship. Now, not every conversation needs to get really deep and meaningful. When I'm having a conversation, like just the other day, last week, having a conversation with the person who I'm going to hire to build a new website for me. And they showed up and they're like, let's talk about your website. We've got some ideas. We've got a proposal. We've got some branding ideas. And I'm like, great. I'm interested in that. That's the work. But before we do that, tell me what makes a really great client for you. And tell me what doesn't make a really great client. And now let me tell you what makes a great vendor and what doesn't make a great vendor. And honestly, Dave and Karen, the vendor was like, what happened to our conversation? But so it was a bit weird for them, but that's weird for me because I've been practicing for 30 years. But we got into it. And the power of this conversation is it allows us to keep checking in on how we're doing, how our working relationship is doing. So, David, you're speaking to a deep truth, which is this will feel a bit awkward. And if there's a singular call to action from this book, it is be the person who reaches out and starts this conversation. Somebody said to me, nobody likes to be the person who says the first hello. Everybody loves to be greeted. So there's a parallel here, which is be the person who starts this conversation, because it will be awkward, but it will get less awkward. And it can be a game changer in terms of the people you work with.
Nice, nice. Thank you. So if you're just joining us, we are here with Michael Bungay-Stanier talking about how to work with almost anyone. And we're talking about how you build great relationships at work. So if you've got a question, feel free to chime in. Now I'm going to take us back to your questions. You talk about good date, bad date.
Yeah. So these are kind of sister questions. And the key insight here is the patterns from our past will repeat again in our future. For sure. It will keep showing up, even though in the past it was a different person and you were a different person. It was a different context and it was a different time, and email hadn't been invented yet and electricity was on. No matter how far back you go, it's like it'll keep showing up. Slightly different format, but the same basic patterns. So learn from that. In some ways, it's expanding from a conversation about who am I at my best, the amplify question, to now who are we at our best. Mm-hmm. So when you look back on the very best working relationships you have, and this is the good date question, what can we learn from past successful relationships? What do you notice? What was done? What was said? What was not done? What was not said by the other person and also by you? What can you learn from that? Because can you imagine? It's like, I kind of role model that a bit with the vendor, which is like, let me tell you about my best vendor relationships. This is what happened. They're amazing. I did this. And by the way, I kept hiring them and rehiring them because I loved working with them because they did these things. Mm-hmm. If you're my vendor, you're like, I'm gonna write this down because I'd like more money from this guy. I'd like a longer contract. And he's telling me how to make me love him. But also the bad day question, what can you learn from past frustrating working relationships? Because we've had those. I mean, if you just pause for a moment and you think about the most frustrating working relationship, you can feel your shoulders going up and your hands getting clenchy and everything's a little sweaty. And there's wisdom in that. And in particular, I think the powerful place to look is when you hold up a mirror and you go, what did you do and not do? And what did you say and not say in those bad, frustrating, difficult, soul-sucking relationships that contributed to that failure of a relationship? Because no matter who that other person was, it was not 100% them. You were part of this dance as well. So what was your role in the bad working relationship?
Yes. And I also loved how you talked about before with a good working relationship, don't just start with all the things that I did to make that relationship good. Actually, you can ask that question. But first, think about what is it about what they did, right?
Yeah.
So you're not overly taking credit for all
Yeah,
of
I'm
it.
playing with some well-known cognitive biases, which is like when you are asking people about who contributed to a project, if they start with themselves first, they will overestimate the role they played in the working relationship or the team's success. If you say to somebody that distribute the responsibility for the team's success amongst the team members, but assign your percentage last, you'll find that it is narrower and probably closer to the truth. So I'm just playing those tricks.
Nice. All right, we have to talk about repair.
We do.
Now we're back to that. So yeah, how do you approach a? So you're in a relationship and it has gone south. What do you do?
So the question here is, how will we fix it when things go wrong? And in part, what's powerful about this question is you're acknowledging before things go wrong that things will go wrong. And there's a great permission that gives you, which is you get to keep talking about the relationship, and you're both kind of making an explicit commitment to repair before the whatever hits the fan. Now, Karen, I know that your new book that you're writing at the moment is about conflict in the workplace, and repair is probably tied into that in some way.
Yeah.
What are you thinking about or learning about or wanting to teach when you think about conflict and repair?
Yeah. So the first thing is to what I loved about yours was that you're like talk about it before you need to repair it,
Yeah.
and that is one of the main things that we're talking about too. That we've got 4 C's of approaching these relationships, and one of them is establishing this connection and having those kinds of dialogues about how we're going to approach things.
Hmm.
But I would say the other is again like you, like there's so much that is consistent, but it's be willing to go there.
Right.
And what is at stake if I don't? So if I stay
Right.
silent, why is this why is this the thing that I have to say important? What's at stake if I don't say it? What's preventing me from saying it? And gaining confidence from your why of what will be better as a result. And one of the things that we teach when we teach difficult conversations, we'll invite everyone in a Zoom, right? So say, put your fingers on the keyboard and we're going to ask you those questions. No, don't type in, just some of those are for you. But then the final question we would love you to chat in, which is, how will it feel when you've had this conversation and it was successful?
Mm-hmm.
And the feelings are, relieved. There's this
Totally.
powerful feeling. So you get that in people's mind of now they want to have this conversation because they want that feeling. Yeah. So I have to ask you about, so as I was, this was really ironic. I was reading your book and I get a call from a friend. I mean, like a friend, not asking for a friend. And this friend says, hey, I have this issue and I don't know what to do. My wife and my daughter are in such conflict that they're just avoiding the conversation. Like they're not even talking about it. It's not even a visible conflict at this point. It's just a non-conflict. But there's conflict. And the problem is, it's not there's just like one inciting incident that just happened that we could point to talk about. It's bigger than that. Now, clearly part of that is you probably need to go get a counselor, but you talk about in your book a really practical way to have that conversation. And I was really touched because you said, I was on the outside of the conflict. My father was dying, sad, so sad. My parents are dealing with one of the most stressful times of their lives, right?
Yeah.
And I'm in their house, my childhood home, and I'm watching this, and I don't want it to end this way.
That's right.
So what advice? So you have been on the outside and encouraged that dialogue. So what advice would you have for this friend?
Well, it's a fraught thing. There's a lot at stake. And you talked a bit before about, do I do it or do I not do it in terms of dealing with this conflict? And every choice you make, so this person has a choice to try and play a role in bringing the parent and the child closer together, or to have a conversation or move through conflict in some way, or to not do it. And each choice that they have has prizes and punishments. So the starting point is to go, what are the prizes and punishments of me doing it? And what are the prizes and punishments of me not doing it? And there are pros and cons in both choices. One of the dangers of trying to get involved in this is you get sucked into the drama yourself. So, there's something called the Cartman drama triangle, which I love as a way of explaining dynamics. And the three roles are victim, persecutor, and rescuer. And all three of those roles are equally dysfunctional. The rescuer sounds better than the other two, but it's not. It's just as dysfunctional. And there's a real danger that getting involved somehow just embeds the drama triangle. So they would come in as the rescuer. The rescuer would create more victims and create more persecutors. And in some ways, it could even stabilize the conflict rather than improve it. So if I was in that position, what would I do? I'd feel sad and I would get support for my own feelings of conflict and anger and sadness and frustration and kind of do my own work as part of this. So that's part of what I'd be doing. Step number one is, how are you getting supported from that? Because I can't imagine that is anything but its own source of pain for that person to see their partner and their child in that kind of standoff. The second, I think, would be to be realistic about what might be achieved, which is it's pretty unlikely that there's going to be any amazing Disney-esque kind of regathering where we're like, no, suddenly it's amazing again. I think one of the outcomes of a best possible relationship, a Keystone Conversation, is to make bad working relationships better, slightly bearable, slightly workable. And I think if you can make a really bad working relationship 10% better, that could be really powerful. That's a really great outcome. Then what I might do is I might check in with each of the individuals and say, do you think it would be helpful if I, just be clear on what you want. This is a source of sadness for me. I feel that we're stuck and that this could go on without getting resolution. What I want is for you to at least be able to have a degree of interaction and politeness. And what I want is to understand if I could play a role in that. And I'd have that conversation with the child, and then I'd have the conversation with the other partner and understand whether there's an invitation for you to actually get help. And then I might try and figure out how to facilitate that conversation, perhaps using some of the tools in the How to Work with Almost Anyone book. So you can see there's a bunch of stuff leading up to that before you plunge into the conversation. And the story I tell about my dad at home, terminal illness, dying, and he and mum being a bit fractious with each other. The benefit, what we were working from there, is 55 years of a really great working relationship. So it was surface tension rather than foundational weakness. And what it feels like, and I'm just guessing, but it feels like in the case you're doing, which is like, it feels like there's probably a little more foundational stuff going on.
Yeah. Thank you.
What sounded helpful there for you?
A lot of it, but I would say particularly, it's okay to be sad. You feel sad. That is, care about yourself in this.
Yeah. And not just that. I mean, there may be all sorts of angers around there. Like I have a core list of 5 feelings because I'm not that good at understanding my own feelings. So this helps me figure it out. Mad, sad, glad, ashamed, and afraid. And you can imagine in a situation like that they could be angry, they could be sad, they could have shame attached to that. How did I let this get to this place? They could be fear. What happens if this break is permanent and actually I will become estranged from one of these or both of these people as a result of that? You can imagine all of that going on. So there's a lot to do around your own stuff and your own self-care before you try and rescue others.
Yeah. Good. Wow. This went fast, Michael. We are at the end of our time together. Are there any closing thoughts that you have?
Well, I want to say thank you to David Dye for all the helpful comments he's made all the way through this. And I also want to acknowledge his question, which is, won't this feel awkward? And just to come back to this call to action, which is, look, the one thing to take away from this as an idea is have a conversation about how you work together before you have the conversation about what you work on. And the one action is be the person who reaches out to start that slightly awkward but extremely powerful conversation.
Thank you. So your book is basically out. It's out tomorrow.
Tomorrow, 24 hours.
Where can people, where's the best place to find you?
Well, you can find the book most places you buy books. So whether that's online or at your local bookstore, that's great. I love bookstore.org, which is the independent website in the UK and the US for buying books. But wherever you buy your books is great if you chose to buy it. If you want the bonuses that are part of it, bestpossiblerelationship.com, and there's downloads, and there's actually a video of me facilitating or actually having a Keystone conversation with somebody I work with. And if you just want more of me in general, my website is mbs.works, and you can find all sorts of things there as well.
All right. Thank you so much. It's been absolutely a delight to talk with you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Karen.